That completes the roll.
Awesome. We are here and we're ready to go. But first, Sukhil, can you please provide a safety brief and review evacuation procedures?
Yes, ma'am. In case of an emergency, I will dial 911. In case of an evacuation, please take the stairs. Do not use the elevators. Once clear to the building, do not re-enter unless cleared to do so by emergency personnel. There are fire extinguishers and first aid kits on each floor of this building. There's a portable defibrillator on the first floor and staff on hand trained on CPR procedures if needed. This concludes my safety brief.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Sukhil, do we have any public comments today?
No, Madam Chair.
All right. At this time, we are ending the public registration for general public comment. And before we get into specific items on the agenda for this meeting, I would like to outline, as always, the same meeting protocols that we talk about every single meeting. To make this efficient, first, please hold your comments and/or questions until the agenda item has been presented. Second, when the time comes for board member comments or questions, please raise your hand and I will call on you in the order received. Moving on to our first presentation. First item on the agenda will be a case study presentation regarding the City of Oceanside's Quiet Zone project. Brian Thomas, City Engineer for the City of Oceanside, will be presenting this item. Brian, you have our attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Honorable Chair and committee members. Brian Thomas, City Engineer with the City of Oceanside. Today we'll be talking about a case study for development of quiet zone and maintaining a quiet zone. The purpose of the quiet zone is to improve vehicular, pedestrian, and rail safety conditions within the rail corridor and to improve the quality of life for those living within and along the rail system between beaches, schools, commercial areas, etc. The project is an important part of Oceanside's plan to redevelop, revitalize, and generally improve our downtown area and the surrounding areas. So our timeline, we actually started our process back in 2002 with citizens' requests. In 2006, the city began a develop a draft process for design concepts, and in 2007, we began our community outreach. In 2012, our plans were completed. A variety of issues delayed the project a little bit with us, but in 2017, bids were solicited and a contract was awarded. In 2019, we began installation of our quiet zone. Sorry, I'm early morning. Began the installation of our quiet zone equipment. And in 2020, we issued our notice of establishment. And in 2021, we were finally allowed to establish the quiet zone and install the signs. And the best sign in the world is the no train horn sign. Next slide, please. So oversight and approval by different rail authorities. We have the California Public Utilities Commission, as well as the Federal Rail Administration. The FRA authorizes waivers of train horns to allow the establishment of the quiet zone. The FRA also requires a recertification every 2 years. So we are just now coming up on our second year, so we are in the process of going through the recertification process. So that's going to be new and exciting for us since we've never done this before either. With the CPUC, in order to implement a quiet zone, measures must be implemented in the crossing that minimize risk and improve our safety risk index. And the approval to install these safety measures or features is issued by the CPUC. Next slide, please. We actually had 5 crossings within the city at Cassidy, Oceanside Boulevard, Wisconsin, Mission Avenue, and Surfrider, all along the Low Sand Railway project between Pacific Street and Pacific Coast Highway. I'm sorry, that's Orange County. I should know better than that, along Coast Highway. We did receive a grant from Caltrans to help us with the Mission Avenue crossing. All in, our construction was $5 million, but our total cost was closer to $10 million between the design and the permitting fees and the flagging requirements. If we can go to the next one, please. Alternate safety measures include pedestrian gates, cantilever structures, lights, signage, supports. These identify pedestrian path of travel. The pedestrian gates are one-way gates. They allow people who are crossing the railroad tracks to safely exit the rail area if the arms come down, but they lock people out from going into it once the crossing guards come down. We recommend working with a reputable firm that has completed at least 2 quiet zones. We recommend developing a rough order of magnitude for your cost. Work on upfront agreements for track flagging. One of the things that we ran into with the flagging issue was other work took precedence over us, so we ran into a number of delays getting our process done, and there are only certain firms that are allowed to provide flagging. One of the surprises to us was we found that not only were we paying for the flagger, but we were paying for apprentices. So our cost for flagging almost quadrupled during the time. So please be aware of that and get everything in writing up front. If they're going to be providing apprentices as part of their work, make sure that's in writing. The risk assessment calculator should be checked frequently. During our process, we ran into no less than 4 different changes, ranging from we met the criteria to we didn't meet the criteria. So it does become problematic if you just do it once and don't go back and do it again. The FRA will ask you to go back and check the risk assessment calculator just before you send in your notice. And if you don't meet it at that time, they will not approve your quiet zone project. One thing I cannot stress enough is please include in your bid requirements that the contractor must be certified to work within the railroad right-of-way. Without that, you will be delayed several weeks to several months to get that certification. Thank you. Lessons learned: maintain a public outreach page to inform the public of the status. We received several phone calls, mostly on a daily basis. What's the status? What's going on? When will the quiet zone be implemented? Why isn't the quiet zone implemented? So the more public outreach you can do, the more information you can provide, either via website, your PIOs, social media, the less phone calls you will receive. We also did an outreach after the implementation to advise the public. One thing I would like to just kind of highlight here is the quiet zone silences the horns only. It does not stop the warning bells. It does not stop the warning lights. And in fact, the horns are only sounded for about 20 seconds. Horn decibels are between 95 and 110 decibels, and that's set by the Federal Rail Administration. They're required to sound the horns 15 to 20 seconds before entering into the intersection, the at-grade intersection. They get to stop sounding the horn once the first car or the engine enters into the intersection. The warning lights, the bells, the flashing lights, everything continues to about 15 or 20 seconds after the last car exits the intersection. And some of the complaints we still receive today is, can't you turn those horns off? Can't you turn the sirens off? Can't you turn the lights off? We don't like it, in the middle of the night being woken up by the red lights. We have a lot of apartments along the corridor, especially around Mission Avenue. And those where a number of our complaints are originating. And they want us to do that. The FRA will not allow us to turn off the warning lights or the bells. Those have to stay on. So that is a consideration moving forward with it. And probably the last thing that we've learned is that the engineer driving the train has sole and complete discretion and authority over when and how to use the horn. If the engineer feels there's an emergency that warrants the horn, he will sound it regardless of the quiet zone. I'm happy to answer any questions at this time. Oh yeah, let's do the video first. Thank you, Lillian.
The Railroad Quiet Zone in Oceanside is now established. The City of Oceanside has been working through the very lengthy process of constructing railroad crossing improvements to meet Federal Railroad Administration requirements to establish a quiet zone. A quiet zone is a stretch of track where trains do not routinely sound their horns at grade crossings. At each crossing, the lights and bells are still activated to warn vehicle and pedestrian traffic of oncoming trains in lieu of the routine sounding of their horns. Train horns will still be used in emergency situations. The train operator may still sound the horn at their discretion if they observe individuals, animals, or hazards near the tracks and are concerned about safety. Signs are placed in accordance with regulations at each quiet zone crossing through Oceanside to alert people that horns will not be sounded. The lights and bells that activate at the crossings will continue to be in effect for the safety of all.
Thank you. One of the things I would like to point out is the islands that you saw in some of the video there had candlesticks or delineators on those. If your curbs are less than 6 inches in height, you'll be required to either replace the curbs around the signals, or you will be required to mitigate that somehow. We went through 3 different inspectors on this, and we were able to come up with the least cost option of installing the delineators on them. So one of the things moving out of the gate is, once you decide you want to have a quiet zone, is hold a meeting with all the stakeholders, hold a scoping meeting with all the stakeholders to get everything possible that you are going to have to pay for. We were caught at the end with a couple of surprise costs. One of them was when Amtrak came through, they extended the passenger platform at the OTC, and they didn't really block off the edge of the platform very well, so people were walking along the rock ballast between the buildings to get to Mission Avenue to get to the hotels. So we were required to put in a sidewalk and a fence. And we were required to put in some additional pedestrian safety gates. So that cost us an additional $750,000 we weren't anticipating moving forward. So make sure everybody comes to your scoping meeting. If they can't make it, I would recommend you reschedule it so that everybody can come, and get the scoping meetings out, get everybody to agree to them in writing moving forward so that things don't change. One of the things we also learned was that the CPUC, who we unfortunately did not bring to the scoping meeting because of conflicts, had some additional changes for us at the end of the day. So I recommend all the players be up front and be part of the process and discussion moving forward. That way your budget is a realistic budget and you don't have to go back to City Council later and ask for more money to finalize that. And again, I'm happy to address any questions.
Thank you so much for the presentation. And before we get to board member comments, Suhail, do we have any public comments for this agenda item?
No, Madam Chair.
All right, so at this time, we are ending the public registration to speak on this item. Committee members, do we have any? Perfect.
Oh, you're passing it off to me. Okay. All right. Cool. All right. So thanks for the presentation. And I know this is something that we've received some questions around, and I appreciate that we got this update. I have some questions for you, and then there might be a couple questions that I have for NCTD staff. But with regards to the timeline, because I know that you all started in 2002 and then finally completed in 2021, just curious, what was the cost projection in 2002? And then what did it end up being in 2021? Or did you not have any costs penciled out at that time and then brought that back at a later time?
The original cost in 2002 was right around $2 million.
Okay.
So at the end of 2021, all in, we were roughly 10 million at the end of the day.
Okay. And from what I understood, you have 5 different crossings, right? That
Yes.
you all worked on? Okay.
Mhm.
And the curbs and all the other things that you mentioned, that was not included in that $10 million, that the other additional costs associated with like a sidewalk or any of the fencing or curbs, that was additional on top of the 10 million at the end of the day, or
No, that was
included?
all inclusive of all
Included.
those
Okay.
added costs at the end of the day.
Okay. And let's see here. Yeah, I guess this now goes back to staff, and maybe this might be, I don't know, Lori, if this is a you question, but in terms of providing something to neighboring cities like Carlsbad, whether it's this type of presentation or just information around like quiet zones that have been established throughout the region, it would be helpful, because I know we're getting a lot of questions around it and we have obviously our answers, but anything that NCTD has to provide to Carlsbad as we're thinking about should we not, would be really helpful. I think especially from what I understand, and this is a question, once we establish a quiet zone, the liability is then on the jurisdiction, not on NCTD. Is that correct?
It's a little bit more complicated than that.
Okay.
It's set forth in Board Policy 18. But the establishment of the quiet zone and, you know, the operation of existence of the quiet zone falls on the city jurisdiction. There is some liability that is transferred through the agreement mechanism, which is usually an MOU, a construction and maintenance agreement between NCTD and the city. But that is, you know, subject to, you know, the negotiations of the two parties following Board Policy 18, obviously. So it's a little bit more complicated than that. But yes, the establishment of the quiet zone falls to the city in terms of liability.
Okay. Yeah, I think those are all my questions for now, but I'd love if there's a possibility, I don't know, you know, if there are any indications where folks, any of the jurisdictions are interested, if maybe you or Matt would be able to talk to our you know, staff, I
Yeah.
think that would be helpful.
We,
So,
in terms of the RSCE committee,
yeah.
we are intending, I believe on the agenda of the work plan for June, we're coming back with a presentation on the structure for indemnity and insurance related to Board Policy 18.
Okay.
So that might be helpful. In terms of a presentation to the local jurisdiction, since I'm counsel for NCTD, I think it would be more appropriate maybe for Matt or our development services chief to make that presentation. But yes, it's something I think that, you know, we could certainly talk about and get on the calendar.
Okay.
Yeah, if I could also just add just a couple of things. So we have like the templates for the crossing license agreements that we did with the city of Oceanside that we could share with you so that you would see what the language is and that detail. And also the quiet zone study manual report will be available this fall, and that will provide a lot more detail as well.
Okay. And from what I understand, I think just as a follow-up, Encinitas currently is working on an area. And so just trying to understand, like, usually if jurisdictions do this on their own, I'm assuming costs are higher than if you're working with neighboring jurisdictions on it, I would assume.
Well, there would be costs associated with each
Crossing,
crossing
yeah.
within each jurisdiction.
Of course.
So how that plays out and what's needed at one crossing as opposed to the other, you know, would be the costs that you'd have to look at.
Okay. Thank you. I think that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have a couple questions here. Is there any records of accidents in these areas versus now versus before the quiet zones were established?
That's a very good question. I don't have that information in my hands, but
Okay,
what I do know is that if there is an accident in an established quiet zone, the agency will receive a letter from the FRA stating it is under investigation. And I do know that because we did receive one while we were working on the quiet zone. And a few accidents did happen. It was an unfortunate pedestrian versus train.
okay.
And
But
they did tell us that your quiet zone is in danger of being revoked. So we've not had another letter since that first
Okay.
came out in 2019.
Okay, okay. And let's see. So you said you're about to embark on the recertification process.
Yes, ma'am.
What do they look for? It's FRA's recertifying this, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, what do they look for in that?
That's something we're still looking at. We just started the process this
Okay.
morning, so I've taken over for the two people that have retired
Okay. lucky
from
you.
staff, and that was my first question to the remaining staff was, okay, we just certified this in June of 21. June of 23 is our time to recertify. Reach out to the consultant, find out what we need to do to get that moving forward. And I'm more than happy to share that information through NCTD with the group.
Okay, Tracy, do you have any idea?
I do not, but
Okay.
we can
just
take it back
curious.
to our experts and see if we can get some information for you.
So could there be a possibility where a city put in a quiet zone and FRA shuts it down?
Absolutely.
Okay,
And that is one of the things that the FRA states on their website regarding the quiet zone is they can revoke it at any time for any reason with or without cause.
okay, okay. And then, let's see, there was a comment about, let me see if I can find the page, about FRA and risk assessment. Oh, it's on page 7, I think. Check the risk assessment calculator frequently. Is that a risk assessment calculator from FRA, or is it one the city establishes and tries to adhere to?
It's a black box from the FRA. You
Okay.
plug in your numbers to it and it spits out a magic number.
Okay,
And they update it frequently. And one of the things we ran into is we started off with our risk assessment. We met it. Then as we were working on our notice of establishment, we were told to go back and recheck it with our numbers, and then we didn't qualify. Then we were informed, that's okay. When you get closer to the NOE, try it again. So we went through it several more times. They update it anywhere from quarterly to every 6-month basis. They change the numbers for whatever reasons they changed the numbers, and we're still trying to make sense of that. We were just happy to, on our last go around, that we met the risk assessment for the establishment.
okay. Because it seems like if there's a calculation of numbers, that it'd be good to know how they calculate that, so you know where to focus if your numbers are off, but they don't give you that.
No, ma'am.
Okay.
There is criteria tied to the program that you input your information into. You get certain points, you get deductions for things. How close do you have a driveway to the quiet zone? How close do you have a school to it? How many pedestrians do you have on it? So you can get anywhere from the full points to as low as 30% of the points based off a certain criteria.
Okay. And then, do you feel you accomplished what you set out to do back in?
I believe we have, ma'am.
Okay, okay. And then you mentioned a $10 million cost. On one page I saw, you did 5 crossings in 2019, you had a $5 million.
That was just construction costs for the initial contracts.
Okay.
After we put this presentation together, I went through and I found all of the invoices for the entire project. And so for the design, the permitting, the flagging costs, and the construction costs, it was closer to 10 million at the end
So
of
it
the
was
day.
about twice what you calculated.
Yes,
And
ma'am.
did you get any, did I hear you say you got some grants for that, or was that all city funds?
We got a Caltrans grant for
Okay.
$1.5 million. Caltrans also stated they would give us another grant for the sidewalk we had to put in. We're still waiting on that grant to come through.
Okay, so it was basically all mostly city funds.
Correct.
Okay, and can you explain the flagging to me? Is that during construction?
Yes.
So okay.
So
okay,
they actually have flaggers on the track that say, stop.
Right.
We've got people on the tracks 2 or 3 miles ahead. Okay, now you can move. So.
Okay, I see. So that was during construction.
Mhm.
Okay, I think that's all I have. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the presentation. Your staff was kind enough to meet with us at the City of Encinitas and go through the process with us about how it would look for us. And one thing that I learned from meeting with your staff was that some delays in terms of finding the funding or waiting for the FRA, the CPUC to come out. Thank you. Those were the things that ended up sort of adding cost, adding even every year the construction costs were increasing. So thanks, Karina. So one advantage that I see as this committee endeavor is to collaborate. NCTD is doing the study for us. We're learning about those costs pretty quickly. And then the goal is to share the resources and also when we are applying for grants to apply sort of as a united front. Do you see that as being valuable? Do you see that as having been one of the ways that retrospectively you could have looked at reducing the costs, reducing the delays?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's awesome to hear. And so some of these things that you made clear to us is, you know, safety is the most important thing, I think, for all of us from a city's perspective. And even with the train horn, we still experience trespasser strikes and fatalities on our tracks. And so when we quiet the horns, we add other safety measures like the pedestrian gates, the cantilevered structures, lights, signage, signposts. So I guess what the question is for all of us is, like, can we enhance safety while also quieting the horn? And what are the benefits to the community? And it sounds like despite these little things with, you know, the red lights blinking and some residual little ringing and things, that overall it's a project that the community of Oceanside is really satisfied with.
Correct. You know, other than the people that habitually complain about the bells and things, for the most part, everybody's really happy with the quiet zone, especially the ones that live in the high density housing corridors. They're real happy the trains aren't going off at 3 o'clock in the morning. And along the Lausanne, I think right now we experience something like 68 trains, and they're anticipated to go to 130 trains a day. So they're real happy about that. So we think it was a good investment.
That's great. Thank you so much for being here today.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Great questions. Thank you for asking about the flagging, because I was going to ask that question too. And that almost seems like if we're going to have a situation where there's going to be multiple jurisdictions embarking on a quiet zone together, that maybe that, I don't know if the flagging could be a cost sharing, or, you know, I feel like at this point, there's so much interest from jurisdictions on the Lausanne corridor and on the Sprinter corridor for quiet zones that at NCTD, it would be really good to kind of bundle some of these things together so that we can get to the collaboration that that we need. So with that, I just want to highlight a few things that the board members said. Looking at accidents before and after quiet zones, I think that's really important. So I would love to see that data. I don't know who's in charge of collecting that data, if it's NCTD that can pull that, or if we have to work with the different jurisdictions to do that.
We can work with our safety division on pulling some information for you.
Okay, yeah, that, I think that would be really helpful, because as we start moving towards working on establishing more quiet zones, I think it's important for us to share that information with the public. And even the fact, what you brought up, right, that, you know, some of these lights and bells, they're still going to happen, right? So creating a real fundamental understanding at the public level of what a quiet zone is. Because I know when I first heard about it, which wasn't too long ago, I was like, oh, okay, well, it's like totally quiet, but that's not the case. So I really, really appreciate your presentation. But I think, you know, from this presentation and from the questions that we're asking, just figuring out how we can have a level playing field, not only for the board members, but also for the public to understand what a quiet zone is and how long it could take and how much money it could take. And the fact that you said that, you know, you have to recertify. How often is a recertification necessary?
Every 2 years, ma'am.
So every 2 years. So every 2 years, there's the opportunity that all the investment that you put in could be, I'm not going to say, like, I don't want to say for nothing, because they are improvements, but they won't help you maintain that quiet zone. And the fact that there doesn't need to be just cause for that is, I think the public needs to be aware of that. And so I'm really glad that that came out in this presentation. I would love to hear a little bit more. Thank you, Board Member Bhat Patel, for bringing up different ways of, you know, what NCTD can do, and hearing about Board Policy 18 and some of the templates that we have. I think that's important as well, to have that as part of like this bundled package of presenting what a quiet zone is. And yeah, I think that's all from me. But the more that we can create a collaborative way to discuss this with NCTD and the different jurisdictions, then maybe we can figure out cost sharing too, because that going from 2 million to 10 million is a huge difference. Even taking into account inflation, that's a really, really big difference in costs. But 5 crossings, I mean, that's a good amount. So thank you again for the presentation. Any additional comments, please?
The recertification, is that an outside consultant that comes in, or the FRA? And what is the approximate cost to that?
We're still working through that with our consultant, the
Okay.
one that provided the design.
Okay,
But we have to recertify it and provide all the documentation to the FRA for the
okay.
final
So
documentation.
you don't know the cost yet? Does the FRA charge a fee to recertify you? I bet they do.
I imagine they would, and I don't know what that
Okay.
cost would be
Okay.
yet.
Thank you.
So in Encinitas, you've been such a great resource for us. I'm curious to know, one, did you have to collaborate with any other jurisdiction to get the bookend requirement in place? Because for Encinitas, we will need to coordinate with Carlsbad to quiet our future crossings north of Leucadia Boulevard. So did you have to coordinate with anybody else? And then my second question is, as you're navigating this maintenance of your quiet zone, is there another city that you're checking in with to say, like, have you had your quiet zone revoked for any reason? Or, you know, how do we avoid this revocation, things like that?
Yeah, we've not had any collaboration with anybody, to my knowledge, on that. Our public works crew goes out and maintains the quiet zone, the gates, signs, and the signs are probably the biggest thing, especially with graffiti. CPUC and the FRA are really big on making sure that the signs are clean and free and are easily readable to designate the quiet zone. So our public works crew goes out and deals with that. But we've not had any conversations with anybody else regarding the revocation of their quiet zone or recertification process.
Trailblazers.
Mhm.
What about the bookend requirement? Was your quiet zone all self-contained in the city of Oceanside?
It was all contained within Oceanside.
Nice. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Great questions. And with the signs, I know that's also a popular place for folks to put a sticker. So thank you so much again for the presentation. And this item is just informational. So we don't need a vote. So we're going to move on to our next item.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Our next item on our agenda will be a presentation from the City of Carlsbad and Sandag to speak about their planning efforts to develop alternatives to grade separation projects by trenching in the Carlsbad Village area. Hossein Ajidet, Engineering Manager from the City of Carlsbad, and Tim Briggs, Associate Rail Planner at Sandag, will walk us through this presentation. You have our attention. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, committee members. My name is Hossein Ajide. I'm an engineering manager with the City of Carlsbad, and joining me is Tim Dewitt, project manager with Sandag. So we are here this morning to provide you with a brief presentation on Carlsbad double tracking project. So before I dive into the Carlsbad double tracking project, I'd like to provide a brief background on this item. Since the railroad passes through two of the city's oldest neighborhoods, Village and Barrio, and also train traffic is expected to significantly increase, potentially double in the near future, the city is exploring options to address safety, traffic congestion, environmental and quality of life concerns, including options to lower the railroad tracks below street level, also known as trenching. In 2014, Carlsbad City Council decided to pursue lowering the tracks into a trench through downtown of Carlsbad. In the same year, the project team, including Carlsbad and Sandag, initiated an economic analysis and feasibility study. In 2017, the feasibility study was completed. Also in 2019, the project team completed an alternatives analysis, and that analysis evaluated two options, long and short trench alternatives, and also basically developed some evaluation criteria and scoring, and scored basically two alternatives. In 2019, Carlsbad launched the project outreach program with the community and private property owners near Tamarack. Staff made several presentations to community groups, including Carlsbad Village Association, Carlsbad Chamber of Commerce, Army and Navy Academy, Friends of Barrio, and Village Voices. Staff also developed and launched an online survey, and we received a significant amount of response, comments, and questions, over 9,000 responses, which were documented in the alternative analysis. We also hosted and organized a workshop, which was well attended, over 100 attendees, and we received great feedback from the community. As mentioned, there are two alternatives for the trench project, short and long trench alternatives. Short being about 6,000 feet with 6 new overpasses, and long trench being about 8,400 feet with 7 new overpasses. For this option, we would have to acquire additional right-of-way. Both options would put the trench below, would put the tracks below the street level in the trench, approximately 25 to 30 feet deep below the grade. The width of the trench at the maximum area would be around 55 feet across. We would have to basically, for both options, we would have to replace the railroad bridge across Buena Vista Lagoon and also reconstruction of Carlsbad Boulevard overpass. As you can see in the graphic on the left side of the screen, both short and long trench basically starts from just south of Buena Vista Creek in the northern part of the city and goes all the way south to, for the short trench, just stops north of Tamarack, and for the long trench, just to south of Tamarack Avenue. The major difference between the long and short trench is basically the crossing at Tamarack. With the short trench, the crossing at Tamarack will remain at grade, but the long trench would construct basically a trench, a grade separated crossing at Tamarack. The other difference between the two options would be at Chestnut. For the short trench, the Chestnut crossing basically would be only for pedestrian and bicyclists. Basically, the overpass bridge would only accommodate pedestrian and bicyclists. Whereas for the long trench, we would have the grade separated for vehicular traffic at Chestnut. This graphic basically just illustrates a typical cross-section for the trench. We are looking north. As you see, there are the double tracks in the trench, and also on the left side, we have areas for NCTD access road and also drainage improvements. On the right side at the grade, we would have to construct a shoe fly or temporary track for the railroad to be open and operational during construction. Also, just as added complexity to the project, as you see, there are utility lines in the area, including a 48-inch sewer and 84-inch storm drain lines. Also, the entire trench would be basically constructed below the groundwater table. The level of the groundwater table is approximately 20 to 22 feet from the bottom of the trench. Obviously, the project in this magnitude will have significant constraints. As I mentioned, there are existing utilities that need to be addressed. Those two lines that I just mentioned, the 48-inch sewer and 84-inch storm drain, probably need to be relocated at certain segment of the project, probably close or near Tamarack intersection. As mentioned, we have high groundwater table. At least one temporary track or shoe fly needs to be constructed for the train, basically the tracks to be operational during construction. Generally speaking, throughout the city, the railroad right-of-way is about 200 feet, but at certain point near Tamarack, just south of Tamarack intersection, the right-of-way width narrows to about 100 feet. So there are potentially 3 properties that would be affected in order to construct the shoe fly and also relocate the storm drain and sewer lines. So additional right-of-way would be required. There are also geotechnical and geological complexities and constraints, including dense soil at relatively shallow depth. On the constructability side, construction obviously would need to phase to maintain ongoing railroad operations. In order to construct a shoe fly and temporary track, certain modifications need to be done, including building modified platforms. Also, there is a historic train depot that probably needs to be relocated temporarily, and all these would result in loss of parking. On a street, traffic would be obviously maintained. That's very important. Both options would include massive earthwork. Depending on long trench or short trench is selected, approximately 400 to 600,000 cubic yard of soil need to be relocated and removed over 8 to 12 months. Overall construction duration would be about 4 years. Obviously, there are significant benefits associated with the project, including improvements to roadway circulation and multimodal transportation, and also the beach access. As you probably know, most Carlsbad residents live on the east side of Carlsbad Boulevard, and most destination and attractions are on the west. So this project would provide significant benefit to the community and also the tourists who are visiting the area. Public safety and first responders operation would be significantly improved, including the first responders response time. Railroad operation would be enhanced, and there are significant improvements to environment, including noise level reduction. The 2017 economic analysis indicated significant economic benefits associated with the project. On the cost estimate, in 2020 dollars, the short trench was estimated to cost somewhere between $255 to $265 million, and the long trench was estimated to cost about $386 to $395 million. That equates in 2023 dollars about $272 million for the short trench and almost $406 million for the long trench alternative. These numbers are based on the 26 feet vertical clearance, which is the existing standard for NCTD. The next few slide includes like pictures and visual simulations of the existing condition, and also how the trench would look like after construction. So this image shows Carlsbad Village Drive. This is the existing condition. As you see, there is a single track, and you can also see the historic train depot on the north. Next slide, please. And this slide is basically visual simulation on how the double track would look like at grade level. So as you see, we have the double track here now. Next slide, please. And this simulation show how the trench would look like. As you see, the train, the double track, they're going underneath Carlsbad Village Drive. You have basically the overpass or grade separated for vehicular traffic. There are other opportunities for improvements, including crossing and also the rail trail improvements, coastal rail trail improvements. And this option basically, this visual simulation shows the same option at the same location, Carlsbad Village Drive, with park option. Basically for this option, part of the trench would need to be covered to provide open space and park for recreational opportunities. This photo shows Chestnut. It's a cul-de-sac at the end of Chestnut looking west. You see the single track. Next slide, please. And this visual simulation shows the bridge for pedestrian and also the bicyclist, and also shows the potential basically coastal rail trail improvements. And that would conclude my presentation. Thank you for your attention. I'll be happy to address any questions if there are any.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the presentation. And Sukhil, do we have any public comments for this agenda item?
No, Madam Chair.
All right. So at this time, we are ending public registration to speak on the item. Are there any questions from the committee members?
I do. I like your visuals, seeing the before and after.
Thank you.
There's no doubt which looks better. So is there is there grant money to assist the city with this sort of thing? Or is that part of the federal money that's available?
Yeah, the city funded the previous studies completed, but at this point, there is no really funding available to continue the efforts. The goal is finding grant funding to further the project and bring it to up to 30% engineering design. We are working with Sandag staff, and also we recently had meetings with FHWA and Build America Bureau to basically find any potential grant funding.
Okay, and then you mentioned that it's currently single track, and I think the plan for the future is that would be double tracked throughout San Diego County. Is that correct, Tracy? So is that a city cost to do that double track? Because eventually wouldn't North County Transit be doing the double track portion? So I'm just wondering how that works, if the city has to fund the double track, or does NCTD try to find the money for the double track?
So we work in connection with Sandag on this like we do with any of our double tracking projects. The options obviously are to double track at grade in this area or to trench, and trench is the option. So, you
So
know,
maybe a city would pay the difference for some between,
yeah, I'm
I
not,
guess it's to be determined.
yeah.
I'm just thinking logically, if we're gonna double track it anyway, why would the city have to pay the cost unless they're enhancing the double tracking by putting it below ground? Just a thought.
Yeah, I don't know, Tim, if there's been any further discussions on that from a Sandag perspective.
Back in 2014 is what we were doing, a single track or double track at grade project. And when we took this to the city, this is what started the whole discussion with the trench and where we're at today. And at the time, the city was looking to fund the project minus the money that we had for the double tracking. And that project was about, I say $80 million or $90 million for the double track at the time. So since then, we don't have that money at this point.
Oh.
But
Okay.
that was kind of the agreement, was that they would find money above and beyond what it would cost to do a single or a double track at grade.
Okay. So what kind of timeline would this be? I mean, this is, thinking decades?
We're estimating it's probably taking 2 years to do environmental work and get that done, and then another 2 years to do the final design. Work to get to 100% and bid ready. But we believe you may be able to overlap it by a year, so possibly a 3-year period to do that work. And then it'll take another 4 years, we're estimating, to do the construction. The construction in this area is difficult because we got to maintain the railroad operation, and we'll have to put in a shoe fly track to go around the construction zone. So it's probably, if we had the grant money today, we're probably looking 7 years
Okay,
to completion.
okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Sure.
So it seems like even with the short and the long version of the trench, there would still be some at-grade crossings or crossings that would need quiet zone enhancements. Is that the case, or would those be would quieting the horn south of Tamarack still be part of the plan?
The long trench goes underneath Tamarack, so there isn't any quiet zones at all at that point. I guess you could get up to Cannon. We'd get down to Cannon would be your first. Is that right? Am I right on that?
Yes. Encinitas staff basically reached out to Carlsbad staff with the proposal to enter into MOU and reimburse Encinitas for the design of quiet zone at Cannon. It appears in order for Encinitas to design and construct quiet zone in north of Olivenhain, they would need to bookend it with another station with the same quiet zone status. So the first crossing north of Olivenhain would be Cannon. So that has been the proposal from Encinitas. But like Tim said, for this double tracking effort, The long trench obviously would put the double track into the trench, but the short one keeps the tamarack at grade. So there is potential opportunities for making that quiet zone.
Awesome. And can you just describe what a shoe fly track is? So it would kind of go around
The shoe fly is a temporary track just to provide track for the railroads to be operational during construction. So like the exhibit showed, it would be, at this point, is basically is expected to be constructed at grade on the east side of the track, just to provide a track for the train to go up and down in the area.
And does the train have to have a modified speed, or does it maintain the same speed?
I think that's a question for NCTD.
Yeah, I suspect that it would have to be modified, the details of it. I don't have that. I don't know if you have it either.
No, we don't.
Yeah,
We don't
no.
know, but I'm assuming it would be.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was wondering, because that changes all the schedules and when the train is estimated to arrive and all that. So I'm just kind of curious. And with this, looking at the cost, is the cost of trenching very similar to elevating the track, or is there cost savings for trenching? And why was trenching pursued? Is it because it's like more flat in that area? So I'm just kind of trying to figure out why one option was chosen over another option and what the cost difference might be in a ballpark way.
Comparison cost between the at grade and trench, or you're talking about potentially elevating? having, like,
Yeah, going down or elevating, right? So you all are looking at going lower, right? So trenching, and some other parts, like the Sprinter corridor, we're looking at, elevating. So I'm just curious as to what factors determine which strategy for a grade separation.
Yeah, I mean, the alternative analysis didn't include elevating. Obviously, elevating has additional constraints and complexity, building bridges. Obviously, a coastal commission probably wouldn't like that. It would block the view to the ocean, and that has significant environmental issues associated with that. So that's why that alternative was never really explored further.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Other than that, thank you so much for the presentation, and I concur that the illustrations, simulated illustrations, are wonderful, and it's especially looking at the vast improvement and how in some of these areas you could also put a park, which is that's just incredible, an incredible public benefit. So thank you again so much. This is another informational item, no vote required. So we'll go ahead and move on to our last item on the agenda, which will be an overview of grant opportunities for upcoming district projects. Mary Dover, Government Affairs Officer, will review this item. Mary, we have your full attention here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we wanted to provide you with this presentation. Next slide, please, Hale. At the last RSCE committee meeting, the committee received a presentation on the priority projects of each of the member cities along the rail corridor, both the Sprinter and the Coaster. So the intention with this presentation was to provide an overview of those priority projects, opportunities to potentially bundle those projects, and then potential grant funding to move those projects forward. Slide, please. And I should preface this with, this is not an exhaustive list of all of the priority projects. I just cherry picked a few that fit well into the proposed categories. So these are grade crossing projects from the city of Vista, San Marcos, most of the cities along the corridor. You just heard about the Carlsbad Village Trench, which would be a grade separation. The FRA has made it a priority to increase the safety of grade crossings. And so there's a lot of funding to eliminate grade crossings, to make improvements to at-grade crossings, whether that be elevation or trenching. Next slide, please. So potential funding programs for these projects. The three that I'll highlight, the Railroad Crossing Elimination Program is a new program that was passed under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. It provides approximately $500 million per year. It is, as it sounds, intended to eliminate railroad crossings. However, funding is available through this program for at-grade crossing improvements. Obviously, since it's called the Railroad Crossing Elimination Program, elimination projects, trenching or elevating grade separation will be more competitive. However, it doesn't mean that a project is ineligible for this if it's an at-grade improvement. The Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity RAISE program is another federal program. It is less strict in its requirements. Projects are eligible under this program for a wide variety of purposes. Multimodal, multi-jurisdictional projects that are typically more difficult to fund through other programs. Typically, projects that are successful through this program are submitted with partnerships, as it says, multi-jurisdictional, whether that's NCTD and a partner city, or NCTD and SANDAG, or cities and SANDAG, thing like that. The other one is the Reconnecting Communities pilot program. This is a grant program that NCTD is actually not eligible to apply for. It was authorized under the IIJA as well. And the intention with this was for localities to determine the best way to reconnect communities that were segmented by transportation infrastructure, whether that be highways or railroads, a large transportation building, et cetera. So the city will decide what the best way is to mitigate that, the segmenting of communities. Usually that's in the Carlsbad Village Trench case. Their trenching will allow for at-grade crossings to connect the east and the west sides of the railroad. So that could be an eligible project for that. And then I'll also highlight on the right side of this is estimated dates of when the notices of funding opportunity will be published for these programs. Next slide, please. So another tranche of projects that the cities submitted as their priorities were active transportation projects. These are any types of projects that improve walking, biking, and other active modes of transportation. Ones I'll highlight are the Inland Rail Trail, the Coastal Rail Trail, adjacent improvements to transit centers, et cetera. Next slide, please. Funding programs for those types of projects, the Active Transportation Program is probably the most well-known. It's administered by the state of California, and it provides funding for active transportation projects. Localities, the region, so SANDAG, the state agencies and transit agencies are eligible to apply for this funding. The RAISE is also here as well, as I mentioned in the previous discussion about the grade crossing projects. The RAISE program is intended for multimodal, so active transportation projects would fall into this as well. And then another important one is the Safe Streets and Roads for All program. There are two tracks of funding through this program. Implementation, I believe it's planning and implementation. The planning grants are intended for localities to develop a Safe Streets and Roads for All compliant plan. The city of San Diego has the Vision Zero plan, just as an example. And then once the city has established a Safe Streets and Roads compliant plan to reduce traffic injuries and fatalities, then they can apply for implementation grants to start constructing those improvements that they've identified through the first tranche of funding. NCTD is an eligible entity for this. However, since our buses operate on roads managed by the cities, we'd be willing to partner with the cities if they've determined, if they have the Safe Streets and Roads for All compliant plan, and things like that. So again, some of those are estimated dates. However, the Safe Streets and Roads for All program is out now, and applications for that are due July 10th. Next slide, please. So another opportunity for projects to be competitive under grants is bundling. This just means taking two projects that are similar and combining them. This can be beneficial. However, there are also some challenges. If a city or multiple cities decide to bundle projects, it should make sense, right? So they should be close. You know, it doesn't necessarily make sense for a project in Escondido to be bundled with a project in Oceanside. It improves the project if by bundling it makes it multimodal. If there's a grade separation project that's adjacent to the inland rail trail, for example, those two projects can be bundled. Therefore, it's a rail improvement, it's a roadway improvement, and a pedestrian improvement. Also, if multiple jurisdictions with similar projects can combine, that also makes the project slightly more competitive. A lot of the times agencies that administer grants would like to see that the project has wide support, that there are a lot of stakeholders invested in the project. And also this kind of goes without saying, but the project should be mutually beneficial to each other, right? If the inland rail trail project is a very strong project, and then you add a project that's not shovel ready, that, you know, has a lot of complications that might, I guess, drag down is probably not the right word, but the project that is in really good standing. So they should be mutually beneficial to each other. They should provide the same amount of benefits through the bundling process. The challenge to this is that larger projects are typically more difficult to fund. A $5 million project is probably easier to get grant funding than a $20 million project. So it should be, when agencies are determining whether it's beneficial to bundle a project, that's just should be a consideration. So some examples of this in the Buena Creek area, because of the traffic constraints, NCTD is considering grade separation in that area. Also in the surrounding areas near the Buena Creek station, there are no sidewalks. Our bus stops need ADA improvements, so there's an opportunity. NCTD does not own those areas where those improvements will be made, so there's an opportunity for us to partner with the County of San Diego and make the project bundled, so it's grade separation and it has the active transportation improvements as well. At the Vista Transit Center also, I believe the city is looking into grade separation at the transit center, also with multimodal connections up to the transit center. So that's a good opportunity to bundle those projects to provide multimodal benefits. And then at Nordall Road, the city, I believe it's in the city of Escondido, is looking at grade separation at Nordall and Mission. They are also considering the inland rail trail improvements in that same area, an opportunity for those two projects to be bundled. Because of the area, it's on the border of Escondido and San Marcos. There's an opportunity for the cities of Escondido and San Marcos to collaborate on that project as well. Next slide, please. These are just general tips on advancing projects and making them more competitive for grant funding, especially if an entity is soliciting funding from the Federal Transit Administration. The project has to be in the Regional Transportation Improvement Program, which is administered by SANDAG. If there are joint studies and other efforts that would require NCT resources, as some of the speakers mentioned prior, we would like to solicit those requests within our budget process. So we've given a deadline of May 31st. If NCTD is going to provide any resources for a project, we need to do it through our budget process. So for FY24, the deadline for that would be May 31st. Also, if two entities would like to partner on a project, typically there's a MOU that must be executed either prior to the grant submission or throughout the life of the project. Another very important aspect, most grant programs require a non-federal match or a local match. No entity wants to solely fund a project, we've learned. So it's important that through the city's budget processes and our budget process to allocate local match for projects. The federal programs, it's a minimum of an 80% federal investment and 20% non-federal investment. Some of the federal programs go up to 50% though, a 50-50 match. Also, it's important, shovel-ready projects are the most competitive. A lot of federal and non-federal programs provide planning funding. However, to the extent that it's feasible, if the entities can advance the studies, the design of a project to get it to shovel-ready status before submitting the grant application, that can help it out as well. And with that, I believe I will take any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. And Sakil, do we have any public comments for this agenda item?
No, Madam Chair.
All right. At this time, we are ending public registration to speak on this item. Committee members, do I see any questions? Yes.
So there's been a lot of talk about quiet zones. Do you see the quiet zone effort between NCTD, the city of Carlsbad, and the city of Encinitas being a good bundling project opportunity?
Yeah, I think once we determine the parameters of the funding requirements that are needed and the areas in which the improvements will be made, I think that I think it'll be bundled by nature, right? Because the city of Encinitas and the city of Carlsbad, as you've noted, need to have an agreement. And then in order to make improvements to our railroad crossings, things like that, we would need to have an MOU as well. So I think it's kind of bundled by nature and it's multi-jurisdictional by nature.
And is that one that you'd aim for us to have an agreement in place by May 31st?
If the city is requesting any funding from NCTD, then yes, we would need that request by May 31st.
Okay. But if it's like a letter of support or consensus at those
Anytime.
priority projects, that's okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? All right. Well, thank you again for this presentation. One of the things that I would like to see too is I know that LoSan is eligible for different funding sources than the Sprinter corridor, right? Is it that everything, so I'm trying to think about it as like a rectangle and a square, right? So for the LoSan corridor, are they able to access more funding than the Sprinter corridor?
I don't know if I would say more funding total, but more opportunities, I would say probably yes.
Okay.
Most of the Federal Railroad Administration programs must have intercity rail benefits, which means Amtrak. If Amtrak were on the Sprinter corridor, then the Sprinter corridor would be eligible for those.
Maybe one day.
Maybe one day, right? When we make some of the improvements and we have temporals, we don't have temporal separation. Yes, so the Railroad Crossing Elimination Program is actually unique in that it's administered by the FRA, but they actually put a stipulation in that it does not have to have intercity rail benefits. So we were able to seek funding for the Sprinter corridor for that.
Okay.
But yeah, most of the big FRA programs must have intercity rail benefits.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, looking at some of the costs for the LoSan corridor, I'm just wondering if our little Sprinter corridor is going to be able to have any part of the piece of the pie, because it doesn't seem like we're able to capture the vast amount of opportunities that the LoSan corridor has. So I'm just a little bit concerned about that, and that means that I think for our Sprinter cities, we need to move very quickly, so that way we can get our little chunk of money before. Because I know LoSan's really important, but the Sprinter is, very important as well. And we have a lot of ridership on the Sprinter, not as much as the Breeze bus, but a little bit more than LoSan. So I really want to ensure that the Sprinter corridor is competitive. And then when we're looking at bundling, there's examples of the Buena Creek, Vista Transit, Nordall Road. So those examples, so looking at Buena Creek, that in itself is its own bundle, or are we able to bundle these examples together as a Sprinter corridor?
It's possible.
Okay.
However, it might make it
Less
a monster of a project. So in some instances, bundling just doesn't make sense.
Okay.
And I think that, on a case-by-case basis, we can have those conversations. But if it's in a geographic area and their projects are close to each other, like in Buena Creek, it's the grade separation, and then it's the active transportation ADA improvements, then that just kind of makes sense. However, if we receive feedback from a grant entity that says, we'd like to fund this project and another project in an adjacent city, we make these decisions based off of feedback that we've learned, unfortunately, from unsuccessful grant applications.
Right. Okay. And I'm trying to figure out how we can, I know it's really difficult sometimes to connect NCTD to the various staff individuals in the local jurisdictions, and then for there to be enough time to understand what needs to happen, then to move forward with the plan that needs to happen, and then kind of continue along the process. Have we on the NCTD side developed like an FAQ or some kind of resource that's just at least a beginning part of, the questions that we get from the local jurisdictions, under this, this is, I don't know, but just kind of like a structure, like a FAQ structure as like just a basic resource for our local jurisdictions when they have questions. I'm sure that some of the questions we get like multiple questions about certain topics.
Yeah, if it's a grant question, it's me, so feel free to pass my contact information to any of your city staff. But yeah, no, I think that's totally a feasible thing that we can do, and have something on our website that the cities can use as a resource. If they have a specific question on a specific NCTD related thing, they can reach out to a XYZ staff.
Yeah, I think that would be nice just to have, I mean, you would think that we would be super connected, but sometimes our agencies and jurisdictions are not as connected as we would hope. And then we run into, well, it's time to, supply our information to be competitive for this grant. It's like, oh crap, we haven't done all the preliminary work, right, in order to be ready for that step. So because money is, it doesn't grow on trees or in the ocean.
Right.
I want to be as competitive as possible in a short time frame. And these projects are so big and complex, it can be very hard to get to the point where we're able to do, to even be submitting a grant application. So, but thank you so much. Any other additional questions? Y'all are good? Okay. So this is another informational item, and so we don't need to vote on it. Thank you so much for the presentation. And the next scheduled meetings are the Performance, Administration, and Finance PAF Committee meeting. That's May 8th, 2023 at 11 a.m. And our regular board meeting, May 18th, 2023 at 2 p.m. Thank you all so much. And this meeting is now adjourned. I hope you have a good rest of your day. We had an early meeting this time, so good to see you.